We have just received a bulletin from the Associated Press from Texas. It reports that former President Lyndon Johnson is dead. Lyndon Johnson has died. According to the bulletin, former President Lyndon Johnson, he was 64 years old, has died, according to his press secretary. The report only says that Johnson was stricken at his ranch in Texas. He died this afternoon at Brooke General Hospital. Repeating that bulletin that has just arrived, former President Lyndon Johnson is dead of a heart attack at the age of 64. We'll have more details in the program as we get them. As we mentioned a few moments ago, former President Lyndon Johnson is dead. President Johnson died today at Brooke General Hospital. He was stricken during the day at his ranch in Texas. He was 64 years old. Lyndon Johnson was a United States Senator, Vice President, President of the United States, one of the most colorful figures in American political history. A very vibrant man, but also a man with a lengthy record of heart disease. He suffered a stroke in the 1950s, had recent heart trouble. Today, he passed away. Now, we are going to look at some of the scenes in the long, colorful, and active life of Lyndon Johnson.
Lyndon Baines Johnson was raised along the Pedernales River in Texas. His father, Sam Ely Johnson, Jr., was a member of the state legislature. His mother, Rebecca, had been a teacher. Lyndon was a good student. He graduated at 15 from the Johnson City High School, where he had been class president. In 1934, he married Lady Bird and they honeymooned in Mexico. At 29, Johnson first campaigned for a congressional seat. He was the least known of the candidates, but earlier he had been appointed by President Roosevelt as director of the National Youth Administration in Texas. It was in the Depression, and Johnson was able to put thousands of young Texans in jobs. He campaigned hard and won by supporting Roosevelt's New Deal. Johnson's campaign had Roosevelt's personal blessings. He admired Roosevelt enormously and later said of him, "He was just like a daddy to me always. He always talked to me just that way." In Congress, Johnson felt the power of his friendship with both the president and fellow Texan Sam Rayburn. He was given choice House committee assignments. When war came to the United States, Congressman Johnson volunteered for active duty. The Navy commissioned him a lieutenant commander. He was sent to the Pacific, where he served as Roosevelt's special emissary. When Roosevelt died and Truman assumed the presidency, he had become a powerful and important congressman, but thought he'd contribute more to the Cold War as a senator. Johnson crisscrossed Texas in a helicopter, waging a colorful campaign. He won by 87 votes out of nearly 900,000 cast, and Texans jokingly called their new senator Landslide Lyndon. Johnson was majority leader for only a short while when at 46 he suffered a severe heart attack. His brilliant career seemed over, but he made a rapid recovery and was able to come back to work and joke about his illness.
My wife came into my room and Lady Bird leaned over the oxygen tent. And I said, "Honey, I know the odds are against me. They're 99 to 1 that I won't make it." She said, "That's not so at all." Said, "You ought to be optimistic. You've got at least a 50-50 chance."
From Washington, he went to Los Angeles and sought the 1960 Democratic presidential nomination. Kennedy won the nomination on the first ballot and picked Johnson as his running mate. Despite old dreams, he would have been satisfied to continue as Kennedy's vice president. They worked well together. But tragedy intervened, and on November 22nd, 1963, the young president was killed. Thus, Johnson assumed the burden and the glory of the highest office. If there was one philosophy guiding this president during that first year in office, it was the philosophy of getting things done. He faced every challenge, from the Gulf of Tonkin to his settlement of the nationwide railroad strike threat, with restless energy. He wanted to be a great president, to be known in history as the architect of the great society. The sound of jubilation at the 1964 Democratic National Convention was tempered by the memory of John F. Kennedy. But Democrats saw in Johnson and running mate Senator Hubert Humphrey of Minnesota a vital and, most important, a winning combination. They liked Johnson's strong style of running the White House and the country. So they cheered and kept cheering right into November.
Chairman McCormick, my fellow Americans, accept your nomination.
The Johnson bandwagon was in full swing, and he campaigned as if he had invented the art. His style was populist, but he spoke of peace and prosperity. The people listened, and in November, Johnson received a landslide vote. Civil rights was still one of the main issues of Johnson's new term of office. Demonstrators marching in Selma, Alabama, were met with violence. The nation was horrified at the scenes of the brutality. Johnson echoed the feelings of the nation.
They were attacked, and some were brutally beaten. What happened in Selma was an American tragedy.
Civil rights demonstrations increased, and Johnson, a Southern president, but president of all the people, urged passage of the strongest civil rights bill since the Reconstruction Day. President Johnson had his gallbladder removed in 1965, but it was not in the Johnson character to be out of touch. During his convalescence, he met with Vice President Humphrey and members of his cabinet and kept informed on the world situation. The war in Vietnam was still the most pressing problem.
I regret the necessities of war have compelled us to bomb North Vietnam. We have carefully limited those raids. They have been directed at radar stations, bridges, and ammunition dumps, not at population.
This is Garrick Utley with a reminder that you are watching an obituary of Lyndon Johnson, former president who died today in Texas. The obituary is narrated by Ray Scher, longtime correspondent at the White House.
Americans fight to fight the war.
We will not be defeated. We will not grow tired. We will not withdraw, either openly or under the cloak of a meaningless agreement.
Protests against the war were mounting. More and more, the anti-war feeling was becoming anti-Johnson feeling. A new situation on civil rights became one of Mr. Johnson's most vexing problems in domestic affairs. Although the country had civil rights marches and demonstrations for several years, things now took a dangerous turn. Large-scale civil rights riots erupted in many of the large cities, with a loss of life, a tremendous amount of destruction, and a polarization of feelings as many white liberals started to leave the civil rights movement. The Tet Offensive in Vietnam presented a grave crisis for President Johnson and also had a tremendous political repercussion in the country. It triggered new outbursts from critics of President Johnson on the cost, conduct, and most important, the morality of the war. The depth of the discontent over the war became visible when Senator Eugene McCarthy of Minnesota broke with the Johnson administration and actively declared for the presidential nomination. On March 12th, McCarthy scored a remarkable showing in the New Hampshire primary. Senator Robert Kennedy was one of the first to act. Shortly after the New Hampshire primary, he announced his candidacy for president. At the White House, President Johnson watched events unfold and reached a decision he had been pondering for months as turbulence and dissent boiled up around him. On March 31st, he went on national television and proclaimed a bombing halt over most of North Vietnam, and then continued after his prepared text with a political bombshell.
I do not believe that I should devote an hour or a day of my time to any personal partisan causes or to any duties other than the awesome duties of this office, the presidency of your country. Accordingly, I shall not seek and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
After President Johnson's withdrawal from the race, the nation was not surprised when Vice President Hubert Humphrey announced his candidacy. In the midst of the celebration after winning the California primary, Senator Robert Kennedy was shot and killed by an assassin's bullet. President Johnson led the rest of the nation in mourning. But once again, it was time for the political campaign to continue. The Republicans met in Miami, Florida, to name their candidates. In an orderly convention, they picked Richard Nixon and Spiro Agnew to head up their ticket. The Democrats held their convention 1 month later in Chicago. The atmosphere was tense as dissident groups gathered in the city to protest the Vietnam War. President Johnson did not attend the convention. The Democrats named Vice President Hubert Humphrey and Senator Edmund Muskie of Maine to head up the Democratic slate. Richard Nixon won by only a slight plurality in the popular vote. It was a disappointment to President Johnson that his party was not able to continue his work. That there was no peace as he left the White House was one of his biggest disappointments. Mr. Johnson's Great Society and other liberal programs of the period may have paved the way for a new conservatism. But whatever else, Lyndon B. Johnson could point to an extraordinary list of social legislation on the books, put there by sheer force of will. There was within him a streak of fatalism, a willingness to accept things as they were. He was a man shaped by populism, the struggle of the Texas Hill Country. This helped him in times of adversity. Certainly fatalism may be one answer, and another could be Lyndon B. Johnson's confidence in the judgment of history.
Repeating again the news, Lyndon Johnson is dead. Lyndon Johnson was an open man, a secretive man, a cantankerous man, a generous man. He was famous in the Senate for his ability to wheel and deal, and he used that ability, that uncanny knack he had for judging other men, to force passage of the most significant civil rights laws this country has ever known. But he could also be a stubborn man, one who almost never bent to contrary opinion. As president, he pursued the war in Vietnam, and it was a belated realization of the country's mood that caused him not to run again for the presidency. But as was said of another man, taken all in all, we shall not see his like again. He had many, many friends and fewer enemies than friends. Those who loved him and those who did not will miss him greatly. He was a giant figure on the American scene and a man for whom the presidency constituted the most serious business in his life. Good night for NBC News.